This is the all-new Nikon Z6 II, and this is officially my second Nikon camera review on this channel, and this particular Z6 II was provided to me by B&H, and as always, they did not ask me to review this camera, they did not tell me how to review this camera. I simply asked for the camera and they kindly provided. I also got the 24-70 f4 lens and the FTZ adapter, and the lens itself is about $1,000 on its own, and the adapter is $250 for whatever reasons, but if you get them with the camera you save about $600, so make sure to check out the latest pricing at the links down below. Although I didn't review the original Z6, I did try it when I reviewed the Z5 a few months ago, and I thought it was a good camera overall. The image quality was nice, definitely better than the Z5 in terms of dynamic range and low light performance. I've always felt like Nikon colors were quite underrated compared to Canon's, and the images looked nice straight out of the camera, and they were very easy to manipulate as well. The video specs were also pretty decent, 1080 120p, 4K 30. It had IBIS and the joystick, which were missing on the Canon EOS R, and the autofocus, which had been a little behind in the past 2 years compared to Sony and Canon, I noticed was quite comparable now too. But many pro Nikon DSLR shooters did not switch to the Z mount, mainly for two reasons: the lack of dual card slots and a proper battery grip. There was a battery grip for the original Z6 and the Z7, but if I remember correctly, it was literally just a grip. It did not have any controls or even a secondary shutter button that lets you shoot in portrait orientation. It was basically literally just the battery grip that holds the second battery for $200. And if you look it up on Nikon website, they really do their best to not show the photo of the back of the grip, which is pretty funny. So after 2 years, Nikon has finally updated the Z6 and the Z7, and this year has been an incredibly exciting year for us with all the new cameras like the massively hyped Canon R5 and the R6, and the Sony a7S III, the Fuji X-T4, and now the Z6 II. So what did they do? Well, to start, they did add the second card slot. In addition to the XQD slot that doubles as the CF Express Type B slot, it now has a UHS-2 SD card slot. Some people might have preferred to have two SD card slots like on the Z5, and XQD and CF Express cards are quite expensive, but they have their own benefits as well, like faster read and write speeds. They also added a second processor. I guess it was easier for them to just stick two chips on it instead of developing a new one, and it now uses the ENEL15C battery like the Z5. Oh, and they did release a new battery grip with proper controls. And that's pretty much it, really. It's still the same sensor, the same viewfinder, the same screen that does not flip forward, and the body design is pretty much the same except the two card slots, of course. Maybe that's what the name means. It's not the Z6 II because it's second. It's the Z6 with two card slots and two processors. I didn't notice this right away, but looking at the images, you can see the body became slightly thicker and the new camera is about 30 grams heavier as well. The price is also unchanged at $2,000, and the video specs are pretty much the same as well, although Nikon did say there will be a firmware update in February 2021 that's gonna bring 4K 60. So I guess you could look at this in two ways. If you're a Nikon user or if you already like the Z6, this is basically the Z6 on steroids. There's no marketing nonsense like 8K video or a new 200 megapixel sensor, but they did improve most things that matter to pro photographers, like the dual card slots, the battery grip, and the second processor, at least in theory, should make the camera a little snappier and help with things like autofocus, the buffer capacity, and it can now shoot up to 14 frames per second instead of 12. And the new battery is about 20% larger in capacity, and it's now chargeable via USB. And while shooting 4K video, it took me about 2 hours and 34 minutes to completely drain it, and the camera did not overheat at all, and which is a lot better than how the R6 did, of course. The image quality was already top notch, and the video was also pretty good, and the lack of fully articulating screen, not everyone wants that, and everyone always argues about which type of screen is the best, and let's be honest, no matter what kind of design they come up with, they're gonna piss off some people. You can't make everyone happy. But on the other hand, I wouldn't be completely honest with myself if I say that I wasn't disappointed at all. Yes, there are some good upgrades, but the problem is pretty much all cameras are great nowadays, and especially in this price range. The dual card slots, the image quality, the video specs, there's really nothing special about this compared to the competition. And as I mentioned in my Z5 review, because all the $2,000 cameras from 2 years ago are a lot cheaper now, you're naturally just gonna get a lot worse value for your money if you buy brand new cameras. And if you dig a little deeper, you can easily find more things to be disappointed by. I said that 4K 60 update is coming in February, but apparently that's only going to be available in 8-bit and DX crop mode. I'm not sure why they needed 3 more months to shoehorn that into this. I mentioned the maximum frame rate went up to 14 frames per second with the Z6 II, but that only works in single point AF mode with 12-bit RAW or while shooting JPEGs only. You cannot go up to 14 frames per second while shooting 14-bit RAW or in any other AF modes. Nikon is not being very descriptive about this, and I couldn't find any information about exactly how many frames you lose in different shooting modes and different image formats, either on their website or in their user manual. The Z6 II user manual is about 1/10 of the size of the Canon R6 manual, and it's basically only useful if you don't know how to turn on the camera. So I'll just let you see for yourself. The autofocus, long story short, it's pretty good. I mean, when I say good, I mean it works as it should and it doesn't give me any major issues. And as some other reviewers have already pointed out, I didn't notice any huge improvements from the Z6 I with the latest firmware. The tracking in general is pretty good, but for portraits, compared to Sony and Canon, I noticed you have to be a little closer to the subject for the camera to detect their face and eyes, which is not a big deal since face and eye tracking usually only matters in closer range. But for any serious sports or wildlife photography, many would appreciate the R6's viewfinder with the 120 frames per second refresh rate instead of the Z6 II's, which is limited to 60. It also has animal IAF, but unlike Canon's, it only works for dogs and cats, and at least on my dog, it just wasn't anywhere near as good as Sony's animal IAF. It was usually easier and faster to just use single point autofocus. So I'm not entirely sure what that second processor is doing, but if anything, I don't think it's being utilized at its full potential, at least for now. If I'm being cautiously optimistic, maybe it'll provide some additional headroom for improvements as more firmware updates roll out in the future. Unlike the original Z6, which is made in Japan, the new Z6 II is now made in Thailand. I personally don't care where products are assembled, and I've had plenty of issues with brand new cameras made in Japan, but I know that some people do care where things are made, so here you go. And in case you were wondering, the new battery grip only works with the new Z6 II and the Z7 II. It does not work with the original Z6 and the Z7, which is fine. Maybe that'll make them sell more new cameras, but what's funny is the older battery grip, the one without controls, that one works with the newer Z6 II and 7 as well. And the new battery grip is $400. I guess adding buttons to it makes it 2 times more expensive. So overall, the upgrades may seem a bit underwhelming, but I think the Z6 II will mostly appeal to pro Nikon DSLR shooters, especially a lot of D750 users who've been waiting years to switch to mirrorless. The D780, in my opinion, was a bit of an overpriced dud. The Z5 is basically just the same 6-year-old sensor with slower shooting speeds, which is perfectly fine, but if you're spending over $1,000 to upgrade from your 6-year-old DSLR, wouldn't you want something better than what you already have? So although it may not attract a lot of new users to Nikon, I think the Z6 II is probably the first Nikon mirrorless camera that's worth upgrading to for many pro DSLR shooters. The only pro photographers that I would not recommend the Z6 II to will be some more serious sports and wildlife shooters, and which mostly prefer DSLRs anyway, and at least until the new rumored Z9 comes out, if that ever happens. 4K 60 only matters to some video shooters some of the times, and it may not be a true 14 frames per second camera, but the frame rate is still reasonable. The autofocus, it's not magic, but it works. Unless you're a full-time wildlife or sport shooter, it's not going to make much difference. It'll get the job done just fine. Now, if you don't care about dual card slots or the new battery grip, you might get better value for your money with a used Z6. A brand new Z6 right now is about $1,600. You can easily find a used one for as low as $1,200, so that's about $400 to $800 you can save for what is basically 90% the same camera with just one card slot. And in my Z5 review, I said that the Z5 is not worth $1,400, and in less than like 2 or 3 months after its launch, it's already discounted down to $1,200, so there's that too. If you have a bigger budget, if you'd rather have a higher resolution sensor than 2 card slots, you could also get a used Z7 for about the same price as the Z6 II as well. It's amazing how quickly these cameras have depreciated, and the market's getting more and more competitive, and I guess that's only a good thing for us consumers. Compared to the competition, I do think it's priced better than the Canon R6 because that costs $500 more. The R6 can shoot full width 4K 60, it has a fully articulating screen, and it can also shoot up to 20 frames per second with the electronic shutter, so it's a better camera in many ways, but those things only matter to some people, and the Z6 II does have 4 more megapixels. I think the Z6 II's biggest nemesis is still the Sony a7 III, which is almost 3 years old now and $300 cheaper than the Z6 II, and the a7 IV is probably also just around the corner. But the Z6 II does have higher resolution viewfinder and rear screen, a faster memory card slot, 10-bit external recording, and better autofocus tracking for stills and video, so $300 difference may not be too bad. I'm also starting to hear some more rumors about the a7 IV, and of course this is just a speculation at this point, but I hear it will be priced at around $2,500, same as the Canon R6, so that's not a bad news for Nikon. So that's basically my objective overview of the Z6 II, and because it's so similar to the original Z6, there's not a whole lot new to talk about like the image quality or the body design, but now let me just quickly share some of my opinions about the Z6 II, what I like and don't like about it, and what I think they could improve or do differently on the next generation of cameras. Let's start with the design. I'm pretty neutral about the Z6's body design. There are some things that I'm not in love with, but overall the grip feels quite comfortable for a mirrorless camera, and the buttons and dials feel pretty good as well. There are many elements that were carried over from their DSLRs. I was never a huge fan of this interface where you have to hold down the ISO button and turn the dial to change the ISO, and on a small camera like this, it can be a little more awkward. I wish there was a way to customize it like on Sony and Canon cameras so that you can just press the button once instead of having to hold it down the entire time, but I couldn't find a way to do that. But I do love the stills and movie mode switch. I don't know why Canon didn't migrate this into their mirrorless cameras from their DSLRs. It's so nice not having to use the mode dial to get in and out of the movie mode. It's always good to have more physical controls, but I wish some of the buttons were spaced out a little bit more. The back of the camera especially feels quite busy for my taste. I wonder if they can reduce the size of the bezels on the rear LCD to gain a little more real estate because they seem quite big for the size of the screen. For those who don't know, on Nikon cameras you have to turn the lens counterclockwise to unmount and clockwise to attach them to the camera, so it's backwards from pretty much anything else we use in our daily lives. But then their lens hoods work like any other brands, so it's the opposite from how their lenses work. I mean, if you're gonna do something different, you gotta stick to it and own it. I guess it's a little too late to change all of their lens designs, but just a little annoyance, not a big deal. So to summarize, the Z6 II may not be the most exciting camera of the year, but it's far from the biggest disappointment. And in essence, this is basically just the Z6 with 2 card slots, but I guess for many Nikon users, that's pretty much all they wanted. And at least they weren't overly ambitious with their marketing like Canon and their 8K. And in some ways, I like that they didn't make it too different from their old model for those who already liked the camera, instead of pretty much completely changing it for the sake of changing it like the Fuji X-T4. This is definitely a better late than never move by Nikon. This is the first and only viable path for mirrorless upgrade for pro Nikon DSLR users, and slowly but steadily the lens selection continues to grow. And in my Z5 review, I talked about the high price of the Z-mount lenses, and based on the comments from that video, a lot of people seem to agree that they're expensive, but people who own them seem to be quite happy with them. And considering the Z5 will appeal more to casual shooters and hobbyists, while the Z6 is more targeted towards working professionals, their budgets for photography gear will be very different as well. So that's gonna be it for me today, and as always, if you have any more questions about the Z6 II, just leave a comment down below and I'll try to get to them all. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.